Hoenn is a region built on water, stitched together by oceans, currents, and long, meandering routes that seem to stretch on forever. More of its map is covered in sea than any region that came before it. So much so that trainers sometimes joke that the land is the exception and the ocean is the rule. For every bustling city or hot volcanic path, there are wide blue channels, quiet coves, and deep, secret places where the music softens and the screen turns a darker shade of blue. It makes Hoenn the perfect setting for a water-themed sleep story, a place where you can simply float and listen, instead of rushing from one victory to the next. The Pokémon that live here span the whole spectrum of what water can be. There are mighty legends like Kyogre, towering Wailord that somehow feel lighter than they look, and sleek predators that promise power the moment you see them. And yet, for every elegant melodic or terrifying Gyarados that evolves from humble beginnings, there are small, almost helpless shapes hiding in the reeds. Weak little creatures that splash, drift, and nibble without ever really threatening anyone. What makes Hoenn so interesting is how many of these disappointing swimmers there are, quietly populating the roots, turning the ocean into something that feels alive, if not exactly dangerous. This is not a story of glory or victory. Tonight is not about the strongest water types or the most impressive strategies, not about perfect IVs or legendary showdowns. Instead, we'll be taking a long, slow drift across Hoenn's coasts and underwater routes, following the currents from Slateport to Dewford, so from the surf of Route 134, down into the dim seaweed forests, where the music grows quiet and the battles grow mercifully simple. Placed together, these weak, overlooked Pokémon form a kind of soft background noise. The forgotten, the frustrating, and the failures of the water-type world. And we're just here to watch them, not to judge them too harshly. So settle in, close your eyes if you like, dim the lights, and let Hoenn's waves do the work. Imagine them drifting in the current, tiny hearts beating, tiny fins paddling with all the determination of a legendary, even if their stats never quite get the memo. You can treat this as background comfort, a soft-spoken tour through Hoenn's calmest water-type facts, designed to help you relax, unwind, and maybe, somewhere between one underwhelming encounter and the next, gently fall asleep. So as you settle in, close your eyes and let Hoenn's waves roll back in. It's tempting to think only of the giants. Kyogre, sleeping beneath the sea, capable of calling endless rain. Melodic, all flowing scales and effortless grace, the reward for a trainer's patience. Wailord, a hollow blue blimp of a creature, somehow towering above almost everything else while weighing less than it reasonably should. These are the names that fill strategy guides and childhood memories of overwhelming water power. And yet, this is not a story of glory or victory. Tonight's journey belongs to the ones that do not reshape the weather, that do not dominate a battle, that do not appear on competitive highlight reels. For every Kyogre churning the ocean, there is a Luvedisc quietly handing over heart scales. For every melodic sweeping through a team, there is a poor, under-leveled Tentacool that only knows how to poison and mildly inconvenience. Placed together, these weaklings form a different kind of a legacy, softer and far more human. When we say weak here, it is almost a term of endearment. Some of Hoenn's water Pokémon have low stats that crumble at the first serious hit. Others suffer from move pools that seem designed more for gentle splashing than for real battle. And a few are cursed with abilities that never quite help when trainers need them most. Many are not truly helpless. They are simply overshadowed, pushed out of the spotlight by flashier options that evolve earlier, hit harder, or come with more dramatic lore. What makes this so interesting is the quiet, melancholy charm that grows in that shadow. There is a strange comfort in the creature that follows you across half the region, never impressing anyone, never turning a gym fight around, but always being there when you surf from Slateport's busy harbor to the floating wooden paths of Pacific Log Town. Imagine them drifting in the current, appearing again and again in random encounters, frustrating in the moment, and then somehow fond in hindsight once the battle screen fades. So we will move slowly, from route to route and tide to tide, not to dissect damage calculations, but to linger on little details. A Pokédex line about a fish that pines for love. The way the underwater roots in Hoenn dim the music and soften every sound, turning even the weakest Pokémon into part of a gentle sleep track. Instead of rankings and tier lists, you will hear about awkward shapes, forgotten cries, and the small ways these creatures color a trainer's quiet journey. Of course, not every underwhelming face stays that way forever. Hoenn hides evolutions that bloom out of disappointment, and stories where a weak water type suddenly matters far more than its stats suggest. Somewhere past the next sandbar, beyond one more seemingly useless encounter, there is a Pokémon that looks like a joke and evolves into something you might never expect. A Pokémon that looks like a joke and evolves into something you might never expect. To find it, the camera needs to pull back, slowly, until Hoenn itself comes into view. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine the region as a soft, faded map on your screen. A broad, leafy landmass in the center, warm and green, with jagged coasts and tiny coves, all of it wrapped in a loose ring of water roots that glimmer like a sleepy clock face around the edge. For every patch of forest or mountain, there seems to be another stretch of sea, patient and blue. What makes Hoenn so interesting is how much of it simply sinks beneath the waves. Over a third of the region is water, not just little ponds or short crossings, but long surf routes that feel like open ocean, and quiet dive spots where the surface disappears above you, placed together. These routes turn the map into one enormous, slow-moving soundscape where so many weak, drifting creatures exist mainly as background noise for tired trainers gliding from one town to the next. If you drift your mind to the southwest, the land thins out into scattered dots of rock and sand. Dewford Town sits alone on its island, a tiny square of light in the middle of Route 106 and 107, while far to the west, Pacific Log Town barely counts as land at all, just wooden houses lashed to a floating platform, rocking gently on Route 131. Between them, the sea routes stack and overlap. Thin blue lines where Wingull wheel overhead, and the same few water-type Pokémon repeat themselves again and again, as if the ocean is running out of ideas. Now picture yourself surfing from Slateport to Pacific Log at dusk, when the sky is violet and the horizon is almost gone. The only sounds are the soft push of your board, the distant cries of Wingull, and the occasional splash as a tentacool appears, helplessly bobbing, or a polyper drops down like a badly folded paper airplane. Sometimes a whalmer surfaces with a hollow, echoing call, impressive in size and yet, in battle, more of a round blue disappointment than a true threat. Then, with a button press, everything goes quieter. You dive. The surface fades into wavering light above you, and the music softens into a muted underwater lullaby. Seaweed forests sway on routes 124 and 126. Bubbles rise lazily, and slow, unhurried Pokémon drift between the fronds as if battles are something that happen to other creatures, far away. These submerged corridors feel like natural sleep tracks, places where time stretches and encounters blur into a gentle, green-tinted dream. This is not a story of glory or victory. Instead, as we continue, we'll follow those routes more closely, tracing the path from Slateport's harbor to Passifidlog's floating platforms, from sunlit shallows to those dim seaweed forests below. Along the way, you'll meet Hoenn's weakest, most overlooked water types, the ones that frustrate trainers, clutter encounters, and rarely see the light of a serious team. Imagine them drifting in the current, and know that in the next part, we'll finally give them the quiet attention they almost, but not quite, deserve. So as those weak shapes drift past in Hoenn's warm water, this is a good moment to say clearly what kind of story you've wandered into. This is not a story of glory or victory, not a countdown of strongest sweepers or legendary showdowns, but a quiet hour with the creatures that almost never get fan art, team slots, or dramatic music cues. The ones that appear, disappoint, and are forgotten before the next wave rolls in. For every Kyogre that bends the sea to its will, there is a Luvedisc that politely flops into your hook, offers a heart scale, and then returns to obscurity. For every terrifying Gyarados or sleek Milotic that dominates a battle, there are a dozen little fish that seem to exist mainly to make surfing take longer. What makes Hoenn so interesting is how many of these weak Pokémon live out their entire digital lives as background noise, faint silhouettes under the surface while trainers think about experience points, not personalities. In Hoenn, especially, the ocean is not a single grand set piece. It is a long, repetitive, almost hypnotic stretch of routes 105 through 134, of gentle waves and the same encounters again and again. You surf from Slateport toward Passifidlog, and the pattern settles in. A splash, a ripple, another underwhelming Tentacool or Wingull, maybe a Marill bobbing like a blue boy. These are random encounters in the purest sense, though weak creatures that rarely threaten a loss, more like ambient background characters than heroic partners. And yet, that very weakness can feel strangely soothing. These Pokémon do not demand strategy. They do not force difficult choices. They rarely punish a moment of inattention. They simply appear, flop around with a tackle or a water gun, and then drift away again. Settle in, close your eyes, and you can almost feel that rhythm. Encounter, small action, fainting animation, soft splash of the next one arriving. Like thoughts passing before sleep, they come and go without urgency. Hoenn's water is full of these low-stakes meetings. A Magikarp that gives almost no experience. A Luvedisc that is helpless on the field, but quietly valuable for its item. A Wailmer that looks enormous and powerful, yet bounces harmlessly off your team with shallow moves and awkward stats. Placed together, these disappointing moments become a shared experience among trainers. The long stretches of surfing, the repetitive cries, the gentle, looping music that feels more like a lullaby than a battle theme. If you played these games, you probably remember that feeling more than any specific fight. The sense of drifting toward Setopolis or Passifidlog with no real danger. Just a slow procession of familiar, frustrating, but oddly comforting faces. Imagine them drifting in the current, each one a tiny interruption that never truly matters. And notice how that makes this the perfect place to wind down. No pressure to optimize. No need to chase power. So, as we move into each Pokémon story, the rhythm will stay gentle and predictable. First, a soft introduction to the creature itself. Then why it is considered weak or disappointing. How trainers usually meet it in Hoenn's roots or rivers. And finally, any quiet surprises hidden beneath its unimpressive surface. Some evolve into something stronger, some never do, but all of them help build that drowsy seascape. In the next part, we'll start meeting them one by one, letting each small failure of a water type have its own very modest moment. So now, with our route gently marked out, the scene shifts from maps and ideas to the simple act of casting a line. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine standing on one of Hoenn's wooden piers, the good rod resting loosely in your hands as the waves roll in and out with that slow, sleepy rhythm the region is known for. The bobber lands with a soft splash as the music hums quietly in the background. And for a moment, there is only that patient waiting that every water type encounter begins with. There is always a tiny flicker of hope when the screen shakes, even for experienced trainers who know better. Maybe this will be something useful, something that can actually win a battle, or at least survive more than 2 hits. And yet, Hoenn's waters are full of small, weak creatures that tug on the line with all the conviction of a damp sponge. You reel in, the animation plays, and sometimes it is another plain fish with a forgettable moveset. Another little body that will barely dent an opponent's HP bar before fainting in a single, almost apologetic blow. Placed together, these early encounters can feel like a quiet joke the game is telling at the trainer's expense. For every powerful Gyarados or majestic Melodic, there is a bewildered Phoebus flopping at the edge of Route 119, wondering why it was summoned only to be boxed. For every sleek, predatory Sharpedo slicing through the surf, there is a heart-shaped Luvedisc drifting near the surface, more valuable for the heart scale it carries than for any strength it brings to a team. Out in the deeper, darker tiles, a lonely Relicanth waits in the shadows. A fossil come to life, not quite strong, not quite useless, just heavy, slow, and slightly out of place. What makes Hoenn's water types so interesting is how the region slowly reveals them to you, one cautious cast at a time. At first, you meet the common swimmers on the routes near Slateport, Petalburg, and Duford. Some of those routine good rod pulls that blur together into the same weak splashes and underwhelming stats. Later, as you surf farther out or dive beneath the surface into those muted seaweed forests, stranger shapes appear, the rarer Pokemon that feel more like secrets than encounters. The video will follow that same gentle progression, from the ordinary to the obscure, mirroring the way the game teaches you its own aquatic ecosystem. You do not need to remember every base stat or every awkward level-up move to drift along with this part of the journey. This is not a story of glory or victory. Instead, imagine them drifting in the current, each little disappointment carrying its own small memory of when you first met it, when you sighed or chuckled or simply ran away. Let each weak water type wash past like a passing wave, so familiar but not demanding, present but never urgent. And as we pull in the line for the first time in Hoenn, the Pokemon we meet will not be Phoebus or Luvedisc or that ancient Relicanth waiting in the dark. No, the opening act is something even more quietly forgettable, a catch so mildly disappointing that many trainers barely register it before releasing it back into the sea. In the next section, we'll finally reel that one up and look at it properly to see just how unremarkable a water type can be. And so, when that unremarkable splash finally resolves into a shape, it is not some majestic serpent or mysterious relic from the deep, but a tiny green creature with a leaf on its head and a vaguely bewildered expression. Lotad arrives not with a roar or a crash of waves, but with the soft plop of a lily pad, landing where it probably intended to be all along. It looks less like a fighter and more like scenery that accidentally wandered into battle. Its round blue body, its oversized lily pad, its little vacant eyes. Everything about Lotad suggests that it should be peacefully floating on a farm pond somewhere on Route 114, not standing on the front line against a gym leader. This is not a story of glory or victory. This is the story of a Pokemon that seems designed to make you feel slightly guilty for asking it to tackle anything more threatening than a passing Wingull. For every towering Kyogre or menacing Sharpedo, there is Lotad, quietly bobbing at the bottom of the stat charts. Early in the game, when trainers first meet it on those rainy Hoenn routes, its numbers are modest at best. Low defenses, gentle little attacks, and a speed stat that suggests it is in no particular hurry to do anything. Its grass and water typing promises versatility and power later, but at this stage, it mostly means extra ways to be weak to the wrong move at the wrong time. What makes Lotad so interesting is how it tempts you with potential while offering so little in the moment. You catch one in the drizzle on Route 102 or 114, perhaps charmed by the way its leaf seems to collect raindrops, and you send it into battle expecting something solid, something dependable. Instead, astonish and absorb, nibble away at opponents like polite suggestions, and its tiny health bar melts under even modest pressure. It is not helpless exactly, but it is stubbornly underwhelming. There is a familiar, slightly frustrating rhythm to using it. You switch Lotad in against a water type. Watch it absorb a bit of energy, then watch it nearly faint to a neutral hit. You heal it. You try again. You tell yourself that one day it evolves, that one day this sleepy pad will become something worth all the trouble. And yet, for many trainers, that day never comes, because Lotad quietly slips back into the PC box, replaced by something that can actually finish a battle. Those who are patient, though, see the transformation. First Lombre, then Ludicolo, and suddenly this dozy pond ornament becomes a festive dancer, a creature of rhythm and rain, spinning through drizzle teams and surprising anyone who remembers how weak it once was. Placed together, these stages feel like three moods of the same soul: the timid floater, the awkward teenager, and the party that finally started. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine them drifting in the current. A quiet Hoenn pond at night, Lotad barely moving, its leaf catching each raindrop with a soft, hollow tap, reflections of distant town lights trembling on the surface. The camera pulls back, the ripples widen, and somewhere beyond that, still water waits an even smaller, even weaker resident of Hoenn's endless routes. Ready to show just how fragile a water type can truly be, that smaller resident is Surskit, a tiny, glass-fragile water strider that barely seems like a Pokemon at all, more like a nervous insect that accidentally wandered onto your team sheet. It skims the surface of Hoenn's ponds and roadside puddles, legs splayed like bits of thread, leaving little rings of light on the water that vanish almost as soon as they appear. And you can almost imagine it being overlooked as you rush toward more obviously powerful water types. For every looming Wailord or elegant Milotic, there is this trembling blue speck quietly skating along the edge of relevance. What makes Surskit so interesting is that on paper, it should be special, because Bug/Water is one of those rare typings that makes trainers pause for a moment and think they've discovered something clever. A little water strider that actually gets a water stab, that resists common types, that feels like it should have some hidden power, under that glossy head and those spindly legs. And yet, when it comes time to battle, this weak creature folds almost instantly. Its low stats and shallow move pool, turning that rare typing into more of a trivia note than a real advantage. Another case where design and numbers never quite meet. Many trainers catch Surskit out of curiosity, or simply because it appears early and seems novel, a soft alternative to yet another Wingull or Lotad drifting through the tall grass. There's a moment of gentle optimism as you picture it gliding through double battles, sprinkling water-type moves and bug-type coverage like a tiny tactical genius. This is not a story of glory or victory, though, and very quickly the reality sets in. Its attacks feel light, its defenses feel helpless, and each level up only nudges those weak numbers instead of transforming them. The novelty fades, the frustration grows, and you start to wait for the evolution to fix everything. When Surskit finally evolves into Masquerain, the transformation is dramatic in shape, but almost cruel in theme, because the water typing simply disappears, slipping away as if it was never meant to stay. The little pond skater lifts off, becomes a hovering bug/flying face with eyes like decorative fans, and in that moment, it leaves the water behind entirely, abandoning the one thing that made it stand out in Hoenn's ocean of options. It's as if the region itself says, gently but firmly, that this line was only visiting the water, a brief guest star in Hoenn's aquatic story, who exits stage left before the real battles begin. There is something slightly sad in that, the idea of a water type that doesn't stay a water type, like a raindrop that lands on the surface and then evaporates before it can join the lake. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture a quiet roadside puddle on Route 102, the moon reflected in a silver oval, and Surskit gliding across it in slow, careful loops, each ripple spreading, softening, and then fading into nothing. Now, just for a pattern interrupt, imagine the game zooming in too far, showing this delicate skater trying to fight a wild Electrike, its tiny water-type moves fizzling against real power. The whole scene almost comically mismatched. Imagine them drifting in the current of Hoenn's story, not as central figures, but as passing shapes. Lotad rooted in place, Surskit tracing circles it will soon abandon, other water types barely clinging to that identity before evolving away or being forgotten in a PC box. Placed together, these fragile creatures raise a quiet question in the back of your mind. Which other water types in Hoenn feel like they barely belong to the water at all, and which of them will we watch slip away next, as the tide of this sleepy journey moves on? And as that question hangs there, like a bubble just beneath the surface, the tide of Hoenn rolls on toward a very different kind of weakness. Not the sharp, awkward kind, but a soft, round, almost comforting one. For every spiny quillfish or looming waylord, there is a tiny blue creature that seems designed more for plush shelves than for battle, bobbing along the shoreline as if the whole idea of combat were a distant rumor. Meryl drifts into view here, the little peekaboo of playground whispers, a round blue promise that many trainers carried with them from Johto into Hoenn. Settle in, close your eyes, and remember that feeling of finally seeing one on your screen. Its rubbery tail ending in a floating orb, its ears like pastel sails catching the sea breeze. It looked like it should be special, a secret cousin to a mascot, a water type that might combine cuteness with real power. And yet, when the battles began, that illusion washed away very quickly. In the Hoenn era, Meryl was a pure water type, with modest stats that felt more like a gentle suggestion than a real presence on the field. What makes Meryl so interesting is how sharply its design and its performance clashed. It looked sturdy, almost buoyant with potential, but early on it was tapping out weak tackles and soft bubbles, splashing more in spirit than in damage. Some are weak, others are simply strange, and a few, like Marill, are remembered less for what they can do, and more for how little they bring to a battle when you first meet them. Imagine surfing along one of Hoenn's many water routes, perhaps leaving Petalburg, and gliding past the quiet shallows, where the music softens and the waves roll in slow, even patterns. You hook a Marill, you catch it, and you decide, in that hopeful moment, that this will be your partner, your little blue anchor against all the strong foes ahead. Then the levels pass, the wild tentacool and winggull fall faster than your own partner can manage, and each time Marill steps onto the field, it feels a little more helpless, a little more like a bouncy liability than a reliable teammate. Hidden behind the scenes, of course, there was huge power, an ability that could secretly double its attack. But in those days, most casual trainers never quite understood why some Marill hit harder than others, and many never saw that potential at all. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is the story of a creature that, in Hoenn, mostly soaked up experience and disappointment in equal measure. Placed together, these faint details form a picture of a Pokémon that seemed to float through the game, present but rarely impressive. Only later, when fairy typing arrived and Azumarill gained new moves and new roles, did the world look back and realize that this sleepy Hoenn companion had the heart of a powerhouse waiting inside it, that the soft blue ball could, under the right rules, become something fearsome. For every Gyarados that roars its strength from the start of its evolution, there is a Marill that waits patiently for the game itself to change around it. Imagine them drifting in the current. The old, unimpressive Marill of Route 102's ponds and Petalburg's shallows, and the future tournament terror it would one day evolve into, separated only by time and a quiet shift in typing. So as you picture that Marill bobbing near Petalburg, tail floating like a small buoy, not quite ready to be the strong partner it will eventually grow into, you might start to wonder what other gentle disappointments Hoenn is hiding. After all, if even a round little Peekaboo can secretly be waiting for redemption, what does that say about the next water type, lurking just beneath the waves, pretending to be harmless while carrying a different kind of secret? Pretending to be harmless while carrying a different kind of secret? Settle in, close your eyes, and let that question drift away for a moment. Because before the next weak creature steps into the spotlight, the story slows down and slides out onto the water. Petalburg's shoreline is behind you now, just a soft line of houses and trees, the sky washed in orange that is already beginning to sink into purple. And under your fingertips, there is only the simple, familiar command: surf. You press it without urgency, the way a tired trainer might absent-mindedly tap a button they've pressed 1,000 times before, and your Pokémon eases forward, lifting you onto the surface as if the sea were a quiet, moving road. The water catches the last light, orange at first, then a muddier rust. Then, as you glide farther from land, a deepening blue that feels like it could go on forever. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is just you, a small silhouette on a big route, and the gentle hum of Hoenn's ocean music. There is a rhythm here that every player knows, a repetitive little lullaby of mechanics that somehow never quite stops being soothing. A ripple forms in front of you. The screen softens and fades, and for a second, the whole world is replaced by that familiar battle swirl. A weak water-type Pokemon appears, something unimpressive and earnest, flopping in with a cry that sounds braver than its stats. You look at it, you consider your options, and then you simply choose to run. No pressure, no stakes, just a polite refusal and a return to drifting. Again, the board of the surfboard Pokemon rocks gently. Again, the route stretches on. Another ripple, another fade, another helpless little creature trying its best to look threatening, with a move like Splash or Tackle that barely nudges your HP bar. For every mighty Kyogre or towering Wailord, there is this, a line of forgettable fish that exist mostly to break up the silence, to remind you that the sea is full, even when the battles are empty. Placed together, these small interruptions become part of the calm, like waves tapping lightly against a hull. As you listen, match your breathing to that motion, in and out, as if your thoughts themselves were surfing slowly along Hoenn's coastlines. In, as the board rises over a pixelated swell, out as it slides down the other side. The occasional splash of a low-level Tentacool or a particularly fragile Luvedisc barely disturbs the surface. They appear, they flail, they fade, leaving behind only experience points you do not need and a sense that the world keeps going, whether you pay attention or not. And yet, the farther you move from those comfortable starting towns, the stranger the water types can become, and, paradoxically, sometimes even weaker in battle, despite all the years they've supposedly survived out here. Imagine them drifting in the current, odd shapes and colors half hidden under the waves, more atmosphere than threat, more trivia than team member. Somewhere ahead, past these quiet routes and gentle encounters, waits another Hoenn native, whose entire identity seems built around being underwhelming, a Pokemon that has turned disappointing battles into an art form, and the sea is slowly carrying you toward it. And as that underwhelming Hoenn native drifts out of sight, the waves grow a little louder. The sky opens up, and another sound begins to cut through the soft ambience of the sea. A sharp, repetitive cry, looping over and over, like a slightly broken lullaby. It belongs to Wingull, the seagull of Hoenn, a weak little creature that seems to exist less as a partner in battle and more as background noise that has learned how to flap. Wingull is everywhere in this region, circling over Slateport's beaches, hovering above Dewford's docks, and tracing lazy loops over those long water routes that connect half of Hoenn together. For every majestic Wailord breaching in the distance, there is a Wingull skimming the surface, harassing imaginary surfers and calling out in that high nasal voice that players remember long after they have forgotten its actual stats. This is not a story of glory or victory. This is a story of the world's most persistent seagull. What makes Wingull so interesting is how quickly trainers learn not to fear it. Its defenses are paper thin. Its early move pool a small handful of pecks and splashes of water. And even when it pecks a little harder with wing attack, it still feels like a breeze rather than a storm. Many trainers only bother to catch one because they know it will eventually carry fly or help with surf, turning this helpless bird into a convenient travel pass instead of a real member of the battle team. A ticket more than a companion. Imagine them drifting in the current, not the powerful serpents or elegant guardians of the deep, but flocks of Wingull hovering just above the waves, waiting to drop into your path the moment you dare to move. You surf out from Slateport toward Pacifidlog, the water music gentle and slow, and every few strokes, that familiar cry cuts in, the screen fades, and there it is again. Level 15, maybe level 20, still frail, still frustrating, still going down in one or two hits. And yet, the interruptions keep coming, like a drowsy alarm clock that refuses to fully wake you. Placed together, these encounters create a kind of sleepy rhythm. Paddle forward. Wing gull appears. Feint it. Paddle forward again. Over time, the bird stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like weather, like a drizzle of weak battles that never quite turn into a storm. Its evolution, Polyper, will one day learn to summon real drizzle in later generations, finding a niche as a strange, boxy rainbringer with surprising power. But back in original Hoenn, that future feels very far away. Here, in this older sea, wing gull is mostly ambient noise with wings, a moving part of the scenery that just happens to know water gun. As you sail farther offshore, its cries grow softer, only fading into the distance behind you, until even this persistent little creature is finally left behind. Ahead, beneath the darker water, stranger and even more disappointing water types are waiting just below the surface, and the current is already carrying you toward their quiet, forgettable battles. Ahead, the water darkens, and the land finally slips out of view, leaving only that soft, endless blue that Hoenn is so fond of. Out here, where over a third of the region is just rolling ocean and faint reflections, another kind of weak water type waits, not on the shoreline, but directly in your path. This is not a story of glory or victory. This is the story of Tentacool. What makes Tentacool so interesting is how completely it dedicates itself to being an interruption. For every graceful Lapras or terrifying Sharpedo, there is Tentacool, a translucent jellyfish that seems to exist purely to stop you every few steps as you surf. Its stats are modest, its body language somehow both helpless and mildly smug, and yet it appears with such determination that even the most patient trainers feel that familiar, frustrating pause as the screen shatters into another battle. You are not ambushed by a monster. You are delayed by a jelly. Tentacool is not powerful in the way that makes your heart race, but it is just irritating enough to matter. Its poison typing adds that faint edge of danger, as if the ocean itself has a lingering sting, and its access to supersonic and poison sting turns each encounter into a slow, slightly sour experience. You watch your Pokemon hurt itself in confusion. You see the tiny poison icon appear, and you realize this weak creature is not going to defeat you. It is simply going to waste your time and your antidotes, one gentle tap at a time. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine them drifting in the current along Route 134, Route 124, Route 129, all those numbered stretches of water that blur together in memory. You surf for several minutes, the music looping softly, and the encounters become a rhythm. Tentacool, Tentacool, Tentacruel, Tentacool again. Their cries overlap in your mind until you could almost hum them. Placed together, these tiny interruptions forming a kind of ocean metronome that measures your journey in jellyfish instead of steps. In the moment, it can feel deeply frustrating. You just want to reach Pacific Log Town or dive to some quiet seaweed forest. And instead, you are locked into another battle with a level 27 Tentacool that poses no real threat at all. And yet, when you look back, there is something almost meditative about it, like the steady ticking of a clock as you fall asleep, or the repetitive splash of oars in still water. Those weak, forgettable battles become the background hum of Hoenn's sea routes. A soft reminder that not every part of an adventure needs to be exciting to be memorable. For every Tentacool that insists on being seen, there are water types in Hoenn that hide instead. so rare and so unimpressive that you might never have met them at all. As the waves calm and the jellyfish fade back into the deep, another quiet creature waits just out of sight, ready to appear only if you know exactly where and why to look. Out there, just beyond that last jellyfish encounter, the sea in Hoenn opens up into something wider and quieter, and it becomes less about the next battle and more about the simple act of moving over water. Settle in, close your eyes, and let the mind drift back for a moment. Not to numbers or stats, but to a feeling that many trainers share without ever really talking about it. Can you remember the first time you used surf in Hoenn, when the HM stopped being a stubborn obstacle and suddenly turned your starter into a living ferry, carrying you out from Slateport's harbor or Petalburg's shore, and you realized, with a slow, dawning surprise, just how much of the map had been hiding beneath the waves. For every clear, grassy route you walked before, there was a stretch of ocean you had only seen from the edge. And now you were gliding over deep water, watching Wingull wheel overhead, while humble Tentacool and Wingull's equally common friends bobbed up to say hello. It was a quiet kind of revelation, not dramatic, but strangely vast. As you moved farther from land, the encounters began to blur together, one weak creature after another, and yet, somewhere in that blur, certain Pokemon barely registered at all. If you let your thoughts wander there now, which Hoenn water type felt the most underwhelming to you personally? Not because it was mathematically terrible, but because you caught it, glanced at its moves, and then gently escorted it to the box, never to be seen again. Maybe it was that poor love disc, shaped like a heart yet offering only heart scales and the faintest splash of damage, or a lonely Wingull that never quite evolved before being quietly replaced. There is a difference between a favorite Pokemon and what might be called a background Pokemon, the ones that fill routes and oceans like anonymous extras in a film, always present, always available, but almost never truly chosen. For every beloved starter or majestic melodic, there is a whole school of unnoticed Remoraid, a shoal of featureless fish that exist mostly to make the world feel full. What makes Hoenn so interesting is how many of these soft-spoken swimmers it hides in its currents. Placed together, these small lives create the sense of a living sea, even if each individual remains forgettable. You do not need to decide anything right now or share an answer or type a comment. This is not a story of glory or victory that demands a verdict. You can simply let those questions drift through your mind like bubbles rising in deep water, appearing for a moment, catching the light, then vanishing into the dark blue above you, as the surf music in your memory slows to a gentle murmur. Because somewhere out there in Hoenn, beneath all that calm surface, waits a Pokemon that became famous not for strength, but for being almost helpless, astonishingly weak, and somehow still difficult to find. And yet, its rarity and its frailty turned it into a legend of a different sort, a sleepy underdog hidden in specific tiles and secret spots, ready for us to meet it next, just as the waves grow even quieter. So now, settle in, close your eyes, and let that quiet Hoenn rain fall over Route 119. Because the weak little creature waiting there is Phoebus, a fish so plain that even Magikarp looks stylish by comparison. For every majestic Kyogre or sleek Sharpedo, there is a Pokemon like this, all chipped scales and vacant eyes, drifting in the water with the energy of a forgotten decoration. What makes Phoebus so interesting is that it manages to be both pathetic and elusive at the same time, a combination that feels almost like a gentle joke on tired trainers. In the original Hoenn games, this helpless fish only appeared on a handful of specific water tiles, on Route 119, hidden along that long, winding river, under the tall grass and constant drizzle. You could stand there for what felt like hours, casting your old rod again and again, moving just a few steps at a time, never quite sure if you were on the right spot or simply wasting another sleepy evening. For many players, the first encounter with Phoebus is not triumph, but a sigh of relief mixed with confusion. After so much effort, after so many empty splashes and familiar tentacool, the battle finally starts, and there it is. A weak, awkward fish with terrible stats and a move pool that barely exists. Tackle, maybe splash, perhaps a timid little status move if you are lucky, all delivered with the force of a damp sponge. This is not a story of glory or victory. This is a story of landing something rare, only to discover that in battle it can hardly defend itself, fainting to almost anything that looks at it too sternly. And yet, hidden beneath that ragged exterior is one of Hoenn's most dramatic transformations. Phoebus evolves not through raw power or fierce training, but through beauty and care, through contests and grooming and the slow raising of its beauty condition until it finally changes. With enough attention, it becomes melodic, a creature of flowing scales and serene strength, one of the most elegant water types in the region, suddenly able to stand tall in battle where Phoebus could only flop. Imagine them drifting in the current, a single Phoebus in that calm Route 119 river, surrounded by reeds and mist, ignored by passing trainers who are searching for something stronger, something more impressive, something that looks like it deserves their time. Placed together, these moments of rejection and patience turn Phoebus into a quiet symbol of Hoenn's weak to strong theme. A reminder that even the most frustrating catch can, with enough gentleness, become something beautiful. Somewhere out there, one trainer pauses, looks twice at this ugly little Pokemon, and decides to stay, to fish, to wait, and to see what might be hiding beneath all that chipped, tired color. Soon, we'll drift further along Hoenn's waters to meet other gentle disappointments. But for now, Phoebus rests in that river, still waiting for the next patient hand. And somewhere not too far from that quiet riverbank, the water widens, darkens, and begins to feel familiar again, because Hoenn does something very simple and very comforting. It brings back the original joke fish. Magikarp is here, bobbing uselessly beside all these new, uncertain creatures, like an old, worn-out punchline that trainers already know by heart. Magikarp has always been the symbol of water-type weakness, the orange creature that flops helplessly with Splash and, in most battles, contributes almost nothing at all. It appears in Kanto's ponds, in Johto's lakes, and now, in Hoenn's broad routes and little harbors, still offering the same silent, soggy disappointment. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of an attack that does nothing, of a Pokemon that seems to exist just to test a trainer's patience. Hoenn is famously soaked in ocean, with more water routes than any region before it. And yet, for every elegant Milotic gliding beneath the surface, there is a Magikarp bumping gently against a fishing line. You might be sailing out from Slateport, or drifting near Duford's Rocks, or casting a good rod into some anonymous pool. And there it is again, that familiar red shape, thrashing pointlessly. Imagine them drifting in the current, surrounded by Wingull, Tentacool, and stranger Hoenn natives, and still somehow feeling like the weakest thing in the entire sea. The routine never really changes. You reel in the Magikarp, you watch it splash and fail to do damage, and after a few half-hearted tackles from your own team, you make a quiet decision. Into the PC box it goes, filed away with all the other weak things that did not quite earn a place. Or, if you are feeling unusually patient, it becomes a passenger in your party, switched in and out of battle, chipping away at experience, points one fainted foe at a time. Settle in, close your eyes, and you can almost feel that slow grind, that long road from helpless to powerful. What makes Magikarp so interesting is how simple its arc is. Be weak, suffer through it, then evolve at level 20 into a Gyarados that finally justifies the effort. Phoebus, by contrast, sits in Hoenn's rivers as a different sort of test, one that hides not only behind bad stats, but behind obscure tiles and beauty conditions, evolving into melodic only when a trainer learns to care in a more deliberate way. Placed together, these two shabby fish suggest that Hoenn quietly loves the idea that some of its most frustrating catches are secret reservoirs of power. And yet, Hoenn's waters are wide, and not every small, weak water type is waiting to erupt into something terrifying. Some will never be more than background ripples, tiny shapes that nibble at bait and vanish without reward. In the next stretch of sea, another familiar heart-shaped silhouette is waiting, and its story is far less generous. So for a moment, settle in, close your eyes, and let Hoenn shrink down to a single stretch of land and water. The wide ocean and bustling harbors fall away, and all that remains is Route 119, a tall, narrow ribbon of wilderness, where the rain never quite stops, and the sky always feels a little too low. The clouds here don't crash or roar, they just weep steadily, a soft curtain of water that turns the whole route a muted green-gray. Tall grass sways in slow motion on either side of the path, brushing against the legs of wandering trainers and hiding small, weak creatures that would rather not be noticed. The river at the center of it all moves calmly, not a torrent, just a long, patient vein of water winding under bridges and past mossy banks, while the in-game music loops in gentle, almost sleepy phrases, repeating itself until it becomes background breathing. You find yourself on one of those small wooden bridges, the kind that creaks once when you step onto it and then settles into silence. The rain taps on the planks, on your hat, on the surface of the river below, drawing tiny circles that vanish as quickly as they appear. This is not a story of glory or victory. There is no climactic battle waiting here, only the quiet act of casting a line into the water again and again, hoping that something rare is listening. The rod flicks forward, a soft splash, a brief pause. Then the familiar tug, and the encounter screen blooms into view. Another unimpressive water type blinks at you from the other side, some poor, forgettable fish that never asked to be evaluated on its stats. For every majestic melodic or towering Gyarados, there is a Lotad, a Barboach, a Luvdisk somewhere else in Hoenn, nibbling without conviction, destined to be boxed or fainted in a single hit. You reel in, press a button, and send it away. The pattern repeats. Cast, splash, pause, encounter. A weak creature appears, flails half-heartedly, and is dismissed. The rhythm becomes almost hypnotic, the kind of soft repetition that makes your thoughts slow down at the edges. The bridge, the rain, the river, the looped music, and the endless parade of small, disappointing Pokémon all blur into one long, drowsy line. And yet, beneath that flat, reflective surface, the story is busier than it looks. Imagine them drifting in the current. Dozens of Phoebas, ragged and homely, sliding past the bridge in unseen clusters, each one occupying a hidden tile that trainers may never stand on. Around them, other weak water types move slowly through the current, unnoticed and unchosen, brushing past hooks that never quite sink low enough, living entire, quiet lives just out of reach. What makes X so interesting is that in this one narrow river, Weakness and rarity overlap so perfectly that most players will only ever see the weak part. The river does not mind. It simply keeps flowing north to south, under your bridge and away, carrying Phoebus and their equally helpless neighbors along like fallen leaves. If you follow that water in your mind, letting the camera pull back and drift downstream, the trees thin out, the rain lightens, and the river begins to widen. Route 119's secret tiles give way to open channels, then to broader routes where the current tastes of salt instead of soil. Eventually, that same water spills into the sea, where the music shifts, the horizon opens, and some of Hoenn's strangest and weakest ocean dwellers are waiting just beyond the next gentle wave. Out past those widening channels, where the river finally forgets the forest and remembers the sea, the water turns a softer blue, and something very small is waiting. Not a looming waylord, not a sleek sharpedo slicing past the waves, but a tiny pink heart-shaped creature that looks less like a fighter and more like it wandered off the front of a Valentine's Day card and fell into the ocean by mistake. This is Luwdisk, a pure water type that seems designed first and foremost to be adorable, a drifting symbol of affection bobbing through Hoenn's roots. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture it hovering just beneath the surface near Log or Route 128, tilting side to side as if it's trying its best to be romantic decor in a place built for battles. What makes Luwdisk so interesting is how firmly it refuses to live up to anything resembling real power, even by the humble standards of the weak creatures we're visiting tonight. Its stats are among the lowest of any fully evolved water type, and that's saying something in a region already crowded with forgettable fish. Its attack is poor, its special attack is barely better, and its defenses are so fragile that even gentle stray hits feel like overkill, turning it into a helpless little target rather than a serious partner. For every Milotic gliding through competitive teams, there is a Luwdisk, quietly reminding trainers that not every Pokemon evolves, not every design gets a second chance, and sometimes the story just stops. Placed together, these numbers and move pool options paint a slightly sad picture. Luwdisk can learn Water Pulse, Ice Beam, a few support moves, but when it enters battle, it feels like throwing a greeting card at a tidal wave. Trainers who try to use it often discover that it is not merely weak. It is frustrating, fading quickly under pressure, and contributing almost nothing beyond a brief moment of novelty. This is not a story of glory or victory. And yet, Luwdisk is not entirely useless. In Hoenn, it is most famous for the heart scales it often carries, those delicate items that allow move tutors to help other Pokemon relearn forgotten techniques. So instead of starring in battle, Luwdisk becomes a kind of living item dispenser, a pink delivery service for more competent teammates. You dive beneath the waves, or cast a good rod off the coast of Moss Deep. Hook one out of curiosity, and then realize the real treasure is not the creature itself, but what it happens to be holding. Imagine them drifting in the current, a school of heart-shaped fish, each one essentially a swimming currency token, fluttering away as trainers farm encounter after encounter. There is something gently melancholic about a Pokemon themed around love, spending most of its in-game life being harvested for resources, passed over the moment its heart scale is taken, then boxed or released without ceremony. As we move on to other forgotten ocean dwellers, deeper and stranger than this little pink emblem, that quiet irony lingers in the water like a fading ripple. Deeper than Luwdisk's warm, shallow coves, Hoenn hides something older, stranger, and much, much heavier. As you settle in, close your eyes, The bright pink hearts of the surface fade away, and the water darkens into a slow, bluish twilight where time itself seems to sink. Down here lives Relicanth, a rock and water creature that feels less like a Pokemon and more like a misplaced fossil that forgot to stay extinct. Inspired by the real-world Coelacanth, it carries that same deep-time mystery, a sense that it has been quietly existing since long before trainers, gyms, or even Pokeballs, just resting on the seafloor while the ages drift past above its stone-plated head. For every sleek, melodic, or powerful Gyarados gliding through Hoenn's roots, there is Relicanth, shaped like a relic of primordial seas, with armored scales, blank eyes, and a mouth that always seems half open in a slow, unimpressed stare. What makes Relicanth so interesting is that everything about its design whispers ancient strength and unshakable endurance. The kind of creature you might expect to anchor a serious team, or at least shrug off blows with quiet, immovable power. And yet, when trainers finally look at its stats and move pool, the illusion cracks a little. Relicanth is bulky in the physical sense, but painfully slow, clunky to use, and limited in what it can actually do in battle, relying on awkward rock moves and basic water attacks that rarely take full advantage of its potential. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is the story of a living fossil that feels oddly helpless once the numbers appear on the screen. The journey to meet one is often more impressive than the creature itself. You dive beneath Hoenn's roots, slipping under Route 124 or 126, the music softening as the surface vanishes and seaweed forests sway around you like slow-motion curtains. You drift past clusters of Corsola and Chinchou, bubbles rising lazily, until a small cave mouth appears in the rock. And there, motionless among the kelp, a Relicanth finally blinks into view. In that moment, it feels like you have discovered something momentous, a secret survivor of ancient oceans, and then you send it into its first real battle and watch it move last, hit less hard than you hoped, and struggle against faster, more flexible water types. It is not useless, but it is quietly frustrating. A creature whose presence implies power that its moves and speed can't quite deliver. Where Relicanth truly matters is not in the arena, but in a puzzle. Placed together, these heavy fish and hollow whales unlock Hoenn's strangest secret. You need a Relicanth at the front of your party, and a towering Wailord at the back to open the sealed chambers of the Regis. In that small, specific ritual, this weak, ancient Pokemon suddenly becomes essential, its mere existence turning a forgotten dive encounter into the key to legendary golems. Imagine them drifting in the current. Relicanth, resting almost motionless on the seafloor, half asleep, eyes half-lidded, watching smaller, weaker fish of Hoenn pass overhead, unaware that this drowsy rockfish once opened doors to titans. As the camera pulls back into the dark water, you might wonder what other sluggish, overlooked creatures are hiding in Hoenn's depths, waiting to disappoint in battle, but linger in memory for entirely different reasons. From that drowsy rockfish on the seafloor, the camera can drift upward, past the dim rocks and into clearer, warmer water, where something much smaller and much pinker waits among the currents. In Hoenn's seas, between Slateport's busy harbor and the quiet routes that lead toward Pacifidlog, a tiny coral shape bobs gently, almost like a decoration that accidentally became a Pokemon. This is Corsola, a creature that invites a smile at first glance. And yet, this is not a story of glory or victory. Corsola's design feels soft and harmless, a little branching reef come to life, all rounded edges and pastel colors, as if the game itself wanted to reassure you that this one won't bite. What makes Corsola so interesting is how quickly that comfort turns into disappointment once battle begins. Because behind that cheerful face is a rock and water typing that manages to collect weaknesses the way other Pokemon collect ribbons. Grass, electric, fighting, ground. Even common moves from those types will send it wobbling, and its mediocre stats offer very little shelter from the storm. For every sturdy melodic or hulking waylord gliding through Hoenn's roots, there is Corsola, sitting somewhere near the ocean floor with defenses that look decent on paper but crumble in practice. Its HP is low, its offenses are forgettable, and its speed is nothing to boast about. So when trainers actually send it into a battle, it often feels like watching a decorative aquarium ornament being asked to tank a tidal wave. Imagine them drifting in the current. The predators, the powerhouses, and then this helpless little reef fragment, hoping not to be noticed. Many trainers first meet Corsola while surfing along the southern routes, or diving into those quiet, music-softened underwater patches, where seaweed sways like a lullaby. You might hook one while absent-mindedly fishing, or bump into it while exploring a secret dive spot, and out of curiosity, you catch it, charmed by the idea of a living coral. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture that moment when you open the summary screen, waiting to see what it evolves into, only to learn that it simply doesn't. No grand form, no hidden power, just Corsola, forever. That realization can be oddly frustrating. In a region where Phoebus hides in a handful of tiles, only to blossom into melodic, and where even a humble Carvana evolves into Sharpedo, Corsola quietly refuses to change. You are remaining a weak little creature in a sea of ambitious transformations. Its move pool is serviceable, but not special. Its role in teams vague and easily replaced by sturdier water types like Tentacruel or Whiscash, who at least bring speed or bulk or a clearer purpose. There is a faint, melancholic irony here, because coral in the real world is the foundation of entire marine ecosystems, a symbol of shelter and life. While in Hoenn, this coral Pokemon often feels disposable. Placed together, these fragile encounters become part of the region's atmosphere, rather than its strategy, decorating the routes without ever defining them. And yet, while Corsola at least gets a little time in the spotlight before it collapses under a stray leaf blade or thunderbolt, other weak water types in Hoenn never even earn that much attention, hiding in obscure corners of the map, waiting to be noticed once, then quietly forgotten as the journey moves on. Those hidden corners of Hoenn's map eventually open out into something much larger, the endless, rolling ocean, where the weak and the forgettable are not exceptions, but the rule. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture the fishing rod bobbing gently on a Route 118 shoreline. The soft sound of waves and menu clicks blending into a kind of digital lullaby as the same small shapes rise again and again from the water. Placed together, these form Hoenn's trio of forgettable fish: Phoebus, Magikarp, and Luvedisc. 3 water-type Pokemon united, less by power and more by the size they draw from impatient trainers. Phoebus is the ugly fish with hidden beauty, all ragged scales and hollow eyes, carrying the quiet promise that one day it might become something worth the effort. Magikarp is the original joke that becomes a monster, a helpless orange creature that flops and splashes without dignity until it finally remembers it can evolve into Gyarados. Luvedisc is the heart-shaped item farm, a tiny pink silhouette that exists mostly to hand over heart scales and then drift politely back into obscurity. What makes this little cluster so interesting is how similar their stories feel in practice. You cast the old rod, or the good rod, or even the super rod, and instead of some rare, imposing sea beast, you meet the same weak faces, the same low-level splashes, and tackle attempts that barely scratch a wing gull. For every Sharpedo lurking in the currents, there is a Magikarp wasting a turn with splash. For every elegant melodic poster in a contest hall, there is a Phoebus shivering in a box, never quite chosen. For every imagined romantic love disc pair gliding through the waves, there is the one you just caught, checked for its item, and released without a second thought. Imagine them drifting in the current. Phoebus, in Hoenn's original games, only appears on a handful of specific tiles along Route 119. So rare to find, and yet, once hooked, so underwhelming in battle that many trainers simply let it go, not realizing the beauty it could become. Magikarp, by contrast, is everywhere, from humble ponds to bustling harbors. A constant reminder that not every encounter is meant to be useful, that sometimes the game is content to hand you a flopping, frustrating joke. And Luvedisc, circling gently near the surface on the southern routes, is almost like a living treasure chest, valued more for the heart scale it might be holding than for any move it will ever use. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is the soft, repetitive rhythm of Hoenn's fishing spots, where the act of casting and reeling becomes almost meditative, because you already know, deep down, that most of what you find will be weak, small, and easily forgotten. And yet, that quiet predictability shapes the region as much as any legendary. It teaches that in Hoenn's vast ocean, weakness is the default state, and strength or beauty are rare visitors that surface only occasionally from the sleepy tide of common encounters, just in time to remind you to cast the line one more time and see what else might be hiding beneath. Of course, not every common catch is so harmlessly disappointing. Some of Hoenn's everyday swimmers carry teeth, toxins, or sheer bulk, and they give the sea a very different kind of personality. Or beauty are rare visitors that surface only occasionally from the sleepy tide of common encounters, just in time to remind you to cast the line one more time and see what else might be hiding beneath. Of course, not every common catch is so harmlessly disappointing. Some of Hoenn's everyday swimmers carry teeth, toxins, or sheer bulk, and they give the sea a very different kind of personality. But before those sharper shapes arrive, the ocean itself stretches out and asks you to slow down. Leaving Slateport's bright market lights and busy harbor behind, you press your palms to a surfing partner's back, slip past the last fishing pier, and feel the city noise fall away until it's only water, only waves, only the gentle rhythm of movement under an open sky. You head south first, then west, following that long chain of sea routes that seems to go on forever, where the coastline frays into little sandbars and then simply disappears, and the map becomes a blue page filled with numbers and currents. For every elegant melodic or towering waylord that the Pokédex loves to mention, there are half a dozen weak little creatures bobbing around out here, barely fit for battle, barely noticed by trainers who are just trying to reach the next town before they fall asleep in their chair. The pattern settles in. Close your eyes and let it repeat. A few strokes forward, the soft splash of surf, a tiny ripple in the water, and then another unimpressive wild Pokémon appears, under-leveled and under-prepared, throwing itself at you with tackle or splash, as if that will somehow move the world. A Wingull cries somewhere overhead. A Pelipper answers, and then it is quiet again. Just you, the route number in the corner of the screen, and another harmless, frustrating interruption asking politely to lose a battle. Placed together, these roots become a kind of moving lullaby. The currents tug you sideways. The scattered trainers float on their little islands, turning slowly like buoys that occasionally demand a fight, and yet, even their teams tend to blur into the same small water types that never quite impress. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a slow drift, a reminder that most of Hoenn's ocean is not made of legends, but of forgettable fish that exist mainly to fill the silence between more important moments. Eventually, where the horizon changes, wooden platforms appear first as dots, then as shapes until Pacifid Log Town reveals itself. A settlement that looks like it should sink at any moment, and somehow never does. Imagine them drifting in the current. Houses lashed together, walkways that rock with every step, and underneath it all, a tangle of ropes and shadows where weak water-type Pokemon weave lazily through the beams, living their small, unimpressive lives in the shade of a floating village. What makes Pacifid Log so interesting is how ordinary its waters feel on the surface, and how much they hide. For every sturdy Tentacruel or sharp-jawed Sharpedo patrolling the deeper roots, there are stranger, softer, oddly specific water types waiting just below this calm, rocking town. Creatures whose weakness and peculiar roles almost guarantee they will be overlooked. At least, until we shine a quiet light on them next. From those quiet shallows around Dewford, the camera of your mind can drift outward, past the rocky coast and into Hoenn's open sea, where the music softens and the horizon becomes nothing but blue. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine casting a simple old rod into that vast water, expecting another small, forgettable fish, only for the line to tug and a huge round shadow to rise beneath the surface. Wailmer bursts out of the ocean like a living beach ball, a big blue balloon whale grinning with painted-on cheer. And for a moment, it feels like you've stumbled onto something with real power. Compared to the tiny Tentacool and the modest Wingull that usually greet early and mid-game trainers, this creature is enormous. A bobbing sphere that seems far too large for the little wooden piers of Slateport or the quiet docks of Moss Deep. For every frail Phoebus hiding in a river or love disc drifting near a reef, there is this comically oversized orb of a Pokemon, promising strength simply by taking up so much space on the screen. And yet, what makes Wailmer so interesting is how quickly that promise dissolves once the battle actually begins. Its HP bar stretches satisfyingly long, a reassuring blue slab of durability, but the numbers behind it tell a gentler, weaker story, where its defenses are soft, its offenses are middling, and its move pool, especially before it evolves, leans more toward splashing, spouting, and soaking than truly threatening blows. You might teach it Water Pulse or Surf and expect devastation, only to watch it chip away at opponents in a slow, almost apologetic rhythm, like a creature that would rather be playing in the waves than fighting at all. The first time you fish one up off the coast, it can feel almost intimidating, this round titan looming over early game teams. But after a few turns, you realize it is more of a tanky sponge than a genuine menace, absorbing hits with that big HP pool and then responding with attacks that feel oddly helpless for something so huge. It becomes a kind of friendly wall, a traveling flotation device that keeps your party afloat rather than a spearhead that decides battles. And for some trainers, that gap between appearance and performance can be quietly frustrating. Of course, Wailmer eventually evolves into Wailord, one of the tallest Pokemon in existence, a blue blimp of a whale whose Pokedex weight suggests a density lighter than air, as if it could drift away like a parade balloon if no one were holding the ropes. Placed together, These two forms feel like a running joke about size without substance. Vast silhouettes with surprisingly gentle stats. More spectacle than true power. Whalemer, especially, ends up feeling like a big, bouncy beach ball bobbing in Hoenn's waves. A sleepy, half-awake giant that smiles through every hit, but rarely turns the tide of a battle. Imagine them drifting in the current. The weak fish, the overlooked hearts, and this round balloon whale dozing on the surface. And then ask yourself, what other soft, sea-worn shapes are waiting out there? Even less threatening, even more quietly forgotten, just beyond the next cast of your line. And just beyond that next cast, the water shifts a little, and the view pulls back, as if the camera is slowly rising above Hoenn and out over a real shoreline instead. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine that the endless tentacool you meet on Route 134 are not game encounters at all, but a kind of gentle jellyfish bloom. The way real oceans sometimes fill with soft, drifting bodies that can barely swim, barely think, and yet leave a faint, frustrating sting on anything that brushes past. In nature, they are weak creatures, almost helpless sacks of water and nerves, and still they arrive in uncountable numbers, a living fog in the sea. Hoenn's tentacool are the same. Not powerful, not memorable, just a soft blue curtain between you and wherever you were actually trying to surf. For every majestic waylord leaping in a Pokédex entry, there is a whole cloud of these little umbrellas, doing almost nothing in battle, but quietly defining what the ocean feels like. What makes tentacools so interesting is how close it sits to reality. A nuisance, a background presence, a reminder that most of the life in the water is not there to duel trainers, but to float, to feed, and to be in the way. Then there are the small fish that nobody notices until a researcher or a determined trainer finally pays attention. Magikarp and Phoebus look like jokes, and in the game they mostly are, flopping and splashing and losing every serious battle. But they mirror real species that hide in muddy rivers or crowded shoals, dismissed as worthless until someone discovers their strange migration, or their shimmering scales, or the way they quietly support a whole food chain. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of things that seem pointless until you look a little longer. Luvdisk and Corsola, too, feel like simplified sketches of coral reefs, turned into individual Pokemon so they can hand you heart scales or decorate a route. In real seas, those branching pastel structures are fragile cities, easily broken, easily bleached, and yet most swimmers treat them like scenery, rather than central characters. Hoenn does the same thing. The pink hearts and stubby corals sit at the edge of the screen, weak in battle, quietly hinting at something much larger and more delicate beneath the surface. Placed together, these tiny, unimpressive shapes suggest a quiet truth that both Hoenn and real oceans share. Most of the water is filled with the small, the soft, and the overlooked, the creatures that will never headline a tournament, but quietly hold everything up from below. And yet, imagine them drifting in the current, forming a slow, living background hum that makes the rare flash of true power feel special. So now, let the focus sink back down. Picture yourself diving once more beneath Hoenn's waves, the music muffled, the light turning blue, and somewhere in the weeds, another weak, overlooked water type, waiting in the shadows for your line to break the surface above it. As you sink lower through that blue quiet, the bustling roots and noisy trainers fade away, and the world narrows to sand, seaweed, and the occasional glint of something small and stubborn on the seafloor. Settle in, close your eyes for a moment, and picture it. Not a looming waylord or a sleek sharpedo, but a tiny, perfectly round shell, sitting there like a piece of lost jewelry, rather than a living water type. That little ornament is Clamperl, a creature that, at first glance, feels more like decoration than danger, more seashell souvenir than serious partner in battle. It appears while you're diving beneath Hoenn's roots, tucked into patches of seaweed where the music softens and bubbles drift lazily past. And it rarely even opens its shell in its artwork, as if it's not entirely convinced it wants to participate in this whole Pokemon thing. For every terrifying Kyogre churning the ocean, there is a Clamperl simply sitting. What makes Clamperl so interesting is how underwhelming it feels when you actually decide to use it. Its speed is low, its move pool is narrow, and it leans on a few simple water attacks, while other creatures are already learning ice beams, coverage moves, and tricks that can turn a battle around. You can give it items like Deep Sea Tooth or Deep Sea Scale and feel a flicker of hope. But in this base form, it's still a weak little shell that often faints before it gets to show off that hidden power. Many trainers have the same quiet experience. They fish or dive, they catch a Clamperl out of curiosity, and they bring it into battle expecting at least a modest contribution. Instead, it takes a hit, maybe splashes back with a single water-type move, and then folds, leaving you with that familiar, frustrating sense that you've picked the wrong companion for Hoenn's long roots. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story of a Pokemon that feels like it's permanently warming the bench. And yet, locked inside that closed shell are two very different futures, each demanding the right item and a trade just to be realized. With the Deep Sea Tooth, Clamperl evolves into Huntail, a sharp-toothed deep-sea predator with a more aggressive edge. With the Deep Sea Scale, it becomes Gorbis, a sleeker, eerily elegant creature that looks like it should be far more graceful and powerful than its middling stats allow. Placed together, these evolutions feel like two masks that never quite match the sleepy, buttoned-up little clam that started it all. Imagine them drifting in the current. Above, Huntail and Gorbis circling like minor threats in the dark. And below, countless Clamperl resting half-buried in sand, shells sealed, quietly holding onto potential while stronger Pokemon swim past without a second glance. Somewhere ahead, another Hoenn water type waits with its own small disappointments, ready to remind you that even in a region ruled by the sea, not every creature is built to conquer the waves. Above those resting Clamperl, if you settle in, close your eyes for a moment. You can almost see two different futures branching off, like faint currents in the dark water. Each one a little sharper, a little more dangerous, but still strangely quiet. From that helpless little shell, the line bends in two directions, toward Huntail and toward Gorbis, a pair of evolutions that ask more of trainers than most people ever bother to give. Clamperl doesn't simply evolve with level or a stone. It demands a trade, and not just any trade, but one wrapped around a specific item, like a secret code passed between patient hands. With a Deep Sea Tooth, it becomes Huntail, and with a Deep Sea Scale, it becomes Gorbis, meaning that for every casual Wingull you catch and forget, there is this demanding little clam that insists on cables, connections, and coordination before it finally changes. What makes Huntail and Gorbis so interesting is that by the time you've gone through all that effort, most trainers have already built their teams around easier, more flexible water types. On paper, they are a clear step up from their starting point. No longer as weak, no longer as obviously frustrating in a straight battle. Huntail gains attack and biting power, Gorbis leans into special moves and draining techniques, and both can actually threaten something if given the chance. And yet, in a region overflowing with Swampert's raw strength, Melontic's elegance, and even Tentacruel's strange utility, these two feel like specialists brought to the wrong job, overshadowed by Pokémon that arrive earlier, level faster, and ask far less from the player. Their designs whisper a different story, one that belongs to the deep sea, rather than the bright surf routes of Hoenn. Huntail looks like a true abyssal predator, all jagged jaw and coiled body, a creature you might imagine lurking under the diving spots, circling slowly where the music turns soft and distant. Gorbis, by contrast, is smooth and elegant, almost like a ribbon of water given form, but there's an eerie edge to it, a hint in the Pokédex that it feeds in ways best not described right before sleep. Placed together, these evolutions feel like they slipped in from a darker ocean, specialized, secretive, and strangely out of place on a child's adventure. There's a quiet irony here. The weak, easily ignored clam evolves into predators with real power, and still, almost no one notices. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story of effort poured into something that remains obscure, of evolutions that escape helplessness, only to drift into a different kind of obscurity, living in the shadow of more popular choices. Imagine them drifting in the current just below your surfing path, fully evolved, fully capable, and almost never chosen. And for every Clamperl that at least receives this hidden fork in the road, there is another Hoenn water type that never gets such a chance at all, staying small, unimpressive, and forgettable from the moment you meet it to the moment you box it. Ahead, one of those little creatures is waiting, quietly reminding you that sometimes the sea doesn't even bother to promise a payoff. Ahead, one of those little creatures is waiting, quietly reminding you that sometimes the sea doesn't even bother to promise a payoff. But before we meet that lonely fish, it helps to settle in, close your eyes, and look out across all of Hoenn's water at once, because there is a small, almost decorative cluster of Pokémon that share the same quiet problem. They look hard, they sound tough, and yet they rarely live up to the image their shells and stones suggest. Placed together, these three are Corsola, Relicanth, and Clamperl, Hoenn's unofficial trio of hard-shelled or fossil-like water types that seem sturdy at a glance but often feel fragile or underwhelming when the battle menu finally opens. Corsola is the brittle coral that crumbles under pressure. Relicanth is the ancient fish that somehow hits less hard than its rocky head promises. And Clamperl is the tightly closed shell, hiding a power that almost never fully arrives. For every terrifying Gyarados or elegant Milotic, there is a Corsola, a Relicanth, and a Clamperl, sitting quietly on the ocean floor, more background texture than Team Cornerstone. Corsola's whole body is supposed to be living coral, a reef turned into a creature. And what makes Corsola so interesting is how its design whispers defense, while its actual performance mostly whispers, "Please don't hit me too hard." Its rock typing adds weaknesses instead of comfort. Its defenses are only middling, and its low HP makes it feel like a fragile ornament that shatters the moment a strong grass or ground move comes its way. You imagine it decorating the underwater routes near Setopolis, bright and cheerful. But when trainers actually bring it into battle, it often feels helpless, like the sea itself forgot to finish the job. Relicanth, meanwhile, is presented as a living fossil, a coelacanth preserved from ancient times, its head like a stone battering ram. And yet, when it finally joins a team, This old creature tends to plod along with awkward stats and a typing that leaves it chipped away by common moves, more relic than reliable wall. It can take some hits, it can deliver some in return, but the numbers never quite catch up to the story, and it ends up feeling like a museum piece that wandered into your party by mistake. Heavy, slow, and strangely gentle for something made of rock and history. Then there is Clamperl, already introduced as the shell that leads to Huntail or Gorbis, but in its base form, it is almost pure potential, wrapped in armor that doesn't do enough. High defense on paper, low HP in practice, few moves to threaten with. This is not a story of glory or victory, but of a little clam that wants to be dangerous and mostly succeeds at being frustrating instead. Imagine them drifting in the current, the coral, the fossil, and the clam, all promising protection, all secretly vulnerable. Together, they feel less like weapons and more like decorations scattered through Hoenn's seas. The kind of Pokemon you remember from Pokedex entries and quiet dives more than from gym victories. And yet, their presence reinforces that Hoenn's waters are full of contradictions. Creatures that look strong but aren't, and others, still to come, that look weak but hide surprising depths, waiting patiently beneath the waves for a trainer willing to look twice. So from those contradictions on the surface, the scene softens again, and Hoenn invites you downward. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture Route 128 at night. The water, a deep, glassy blue. Your character gently bobbing on the waves as the surf theme loops in the background, familiar and almost lulling on its own. You open the menu, move the cursor with sleepy precision, and press dive. The screen darkens at the edges, the center fading to a muted teal as your Pokemon slips beneath the surface, and the bright reflections of the sea are replaced by a world of blurred light and softened sound, as if someone has turned the whole game's volume down to a whisper. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a slow descent into a place where even the weak have room to drift. When the view settles, the surface is gone, replaced by underwater seaweed forests swaying in slow motion, tall strands rising like trees around scattered rocks and the mouths of small caves. Imagine them drifting in the current, a Clamperl tucked into the sand, its shell clamped shut as if it has anything to fear. Its stats so low that most trainers never even bother to test them. A Relicanth resting against a stone, looking ancient and important, and yet, in battle, mostly content to sit there and be outclassed. A lonely love disc fluttering past, in a heart-shaped blur, more valuable for the heart scales it might carry than for any power it could ever show. The music here is gentler than on the surface, a soft, chiming echo that feels like it's coming from far away, and the usual rush of trainers and wild encounters fades to almost nothing. For every loud, chaotic route full of Wingull and Tentacool, there is this, a hushed corridor where time seems to slow down, where random battles arrive like distant thoughts instead of sudden alarms. It is perfect for a sleepy mind, a place where even the most frustrating encounter feels too drowsy to be annoying. You float weightlessly above the seaweed, drifting past a slow-moving Luvdisc that blinks at you, as if surprised anyone came to visit. Then a Clamperl that actually dares to challenge you. The battle screen appears, but the threat never really does. This is a weak little creature, more helpless than harmful, and you calmly choose to run. Not out of fear, but out of a quiet decision to keep gliding forward. One by one, the encounters come and go, each small Pokemon appearing like a bubble, rising, popping, and vanishing without leaving much behind. And yet, what makes this stretch of sea so interesting is the secret tucked beneath its calm. Somewhere in these depths, a single relicanth and a towering waylord form the oddly mismatched keys to ancient chambers. Their roles in the sealed chamber puzzle grander than anything their stats would suggest. Placed together, these two weak links unlock doors that legendary titans hide behind. A reminder that even in Hoenn's silent seafloor, the smallest, slowest shapes can quietly hold the weight of history as the current carries you toward the next forgotten face in the water. And as those silent relicanth and waylord sink back into the dark, puzzle piece roles fulfilled, the current doesn't rush you toward another titan or ancient door, but toward something much smaller, much softer, and somehow even less prepared for battle. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture the surface of Hoenn's ponds and quiet roots, where the waves are replaced by tiny ripples, and a blue dot with a balloon for a tail bounces gently at the edge of the water. Azrael is that dot, a creature that many trainers don't meet as a prize catch or a dramatic encounter, but as a gift, a hatchling, or a little mascot that toddles along beside them, more plush toy than partner in a serious battle. It hops on its round tail like a rubber ball, its whole body looking as if one strong breeze on Route 117 could send it rolling into the grass. And in a region defined by oceans, storms, and endless surf routes, this tiny thing barely feels like it belongs to the water at all. What makes Azrael so interesting is that, in some generations, it literally doesn't. Instead of being a water type, it sits in that odd fairy and normal space, like the game itself is admitting that this baby is only borrowing the idea of water from its future self, holding onto a promise that it will someday splash for real. For every mighty Kyogre churning the sea, there is an Azrael quietly missing the water label, smiling anyway, and letting its tail bob like a float on a still pond. In battle, its weakness shows immediately. Its stats are so low that even friendly wild encounters on the way from Slateport to Mobile can feel frightening, and its early move options rarely help it stand out, leaving it to wag its tail, tackle half-heartedly, and hope nothing looks at it too hard. One careless turn, one stray hit from a stronger opponent, and this helpless baby simply folds, fainting before it ever gets to show any hint of power, if there was any to show in the first place. So many trainers share the same quiet story with Azrael. They hatch it from an egg on the daycare road, or receive it as a cute companion, train it for a while out of affection, and watch it wobble along behind them like a little blue shadow. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of patience, of potions used on something that never quite keeps up, until one day the box on the PC feels kinder than another rough battle it cannot survive. And yet, Azrael is the first sleepy step on a line that eventually remembers it is supposed to be part of Hoenn's water world, evolving into Maril and then Azumarill, finally gaining the water typing and real strength to swim, to strike, to matter. Placed together, these three stages trace a long, drowsy journey from weakness to relevance, from bouncing on the shore to actually diving into Hoenn's roots and rivers, like a bedtime story that takes several chapters before anything happens. Imagine them drifting in the current of time, the baby on land, the swimmer in midstream, the round powerhouse at the end. As you follow that slow arc from almost not a water type to a genuine threat, you might start to wonder what happens when a Pokemon never quite makes that leap at all, when the promise of the sea stays forever out of reach, waiting just beyond the next wave. That feeling of almost reaching something, of watching a weak little swimmer never quite touch real power, lingers for a moment. like sea spray on your skin. Before we wade any deeper into Hoenn's disappointments, settle in, close your eyes, and let the water calm down again. The tide doesn't always have to pull you toward a battle. Sometimes it just rocks you gently back and forth, asking a softer question instead. If you had to choose just one Hoenn water type to fall asleep beside, which creature would it be? Not as a partner in some desperate late-night gym attempt, not as a tool for surfing across Route 134, but simply as a quiet presence at the edge of a campfire or a dark shoreline, where the only goal is to stay warm, stay dry, and maybe drift off before anything actually happens. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a small thought experiment about comfort. Some trainers might picture a lotad first, that tiny lily pad hitching a ride on its own leaf like a child who refused to grow up. It doesn't hit hard. It doesn't evolve into some terrifying sea monster right away. It just floats, blinking slowly, as if the effort of thinking about battle is already too much. Imagine them drifting in the current of a still pond beside your campsite, the soft plink of water against its leaf, the almost comical way it bobs when a magacarp splashes somewhere far away. Others might be drawn to Whalmer, the round balloon of the Hoenn Sea, a Pokemon so large on paper, and yet so strangely weightless that it feels more like a beanbag chair that learned Splash. For every sleek melodic, there is a Whalmer, wide, grinning, and fundamentally unbothered by its own lack of grace. You could picture it, resting in very shallow water, its body rising and falling with slow, exaggerated breaths, the gentle slosh against the shore sounding like someone turning over in bed again and again, never quite waking up. Then there is Relicanth, the fossil that forgot to be impressive, a living relic that looks less like a battler and more like an old rock that decided to blink. What makes Relicanth so interesting is how stubbornly unchanged it feels. And yet, it lies there on the seafloor of Hoenn's dive routes, motionless, letting tiny bubbles slip from its mouth. Down there, under the softened underwater music, you might imagine yourself resting beside it, separated by glass-clear water, listening to the faint tinkling of bubbles as if they were a distant lullaby. You don't have to answer out loud. You can share it later in the comments if you like, or you can just let that image settle in your mind. The weak companion you'd trust to keep you company precisely because it can't do very much at all, placed together. These sleepy choices form a little gallery of almost useless guardians, barely fit for a serious team, strangely perfect for a quiet night. Because when we surface again, the Hoenn water types waiting for us aren't comforting giants or cute babies. They're the odd, mid-tier creatures that never quite found their place, too awkward to be beloved, too forgettable to be feared, still splashing around in the middle of the sea, hoping someone will notice them at all. And somewhere in that awkward middle, flapping just above the waves, is a very familiar silhouette. A bigger, boxier wingull, with a beak like a mailbox, and the expression of a creature that takes itself much more seriously than anyone else does. This is Pelipper, the proud evolution that Hoenn's skies are absolutely full of, circling over the endless water routes like lazy sentries, dipping down now and then to scoop up fish, letters, or, more often, your patience. For every graceful Milotic or towering waylord, there is Pelipper, a kind of flying delivery van of a water type, practical, present, and somehow still a little disappointing. What makes Pelipper so interesting is that, at first glance, in the original Hoenn games, it seems like exactly what trainers wanted Wingull to become. Sturdier, more defensive, able to actually survive a hit or two instead of crumpling in a single electric spark. And yet, when you finally used it in battle, It rarely felt like a revelation. It was just another water/flying creature, learning surf, fly, maybe waterfall, quietly turning into a bundle of HMs rather than a source of real power. In Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, Pelipper's role was almost domestic. It was there to carry you from Slateport to Dewford, to ferry you across those long stretches between Moss Deep and Pacific Log, and to soak up wild tentacool attacks while you absent-mindedly tapped through. Its typing left it with that familiar, helpless double weakness to electric. Its offensive stats were underwhelming, and its move pool did little to surprise. It was not a terror of the sea. It was a flying utility belt, with wings that flapped just a little too slowly. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine them drifting in the current. Except this time the current is the warm air above Route 134, with Pelipper gliding overhead like moving scenery. It lands on ship masts in Slateport, perches on signs in small harbors, and appears in random encounters just often enough to be mildly frustrating when all you wanted was something rarer. Placed together, these constant low-stakes meetings turn Pelipper into part of Hoenn's background noise, a white and yellow shape that belongs to the region's atmosphere more than to any serious team. Then, quietly, years later, something changed. In later generations, Pelipper was granted the drizzle ability, and suddenly, this sleepy male bird became a respected rainsetter, summoning downpour the moment it entered battle and enabling entire strategies built around swift swim sweepers and boosted water attacks. The same creature that once existed to carry surf and fly now strutted into competitive formats as a weather starter, shaping the field for stronger partners while it sat there, unexpectedly important. This is not a story of glory or victory, not really. It is a story of how a weak, overlooked support piece slowly found its place long after most trainers had stopped paying attention. For every Gyarados that demands notice the instant it evolves, there is a Pelipper that waits, patient and unnoticed, until the rules of the game move around it. And as we drift further into Hoenn's waters, there are still more of these quiet evolutions ahead, creatures whose moment never truly came, left bobbing in the tide between usefulness and forgettability. And yet, as Hoenn's tides rock gently against those forgotten wings and beaks, another creature waits just below the surface, half smiling and half sleeping in the mud. For every Pelipper that quietly rose into usefulness when no one was looking, there is a Pokemon that looked terrifying on paper, and then simply never woke up. Whiscash is that drowsy disappointment, a whiskered catfish Pokemon that lives in still ponds and murky lakes, its wide mouth curled in a permanent lazy grin. Water and ground together should be a recipe for real power, a typing shared with things like Swampert that shrug off electric attacks and answer back with crushing earthquakes. On the team preview screen, it looks like trouble, a bulky blue shadow that suggests you should prepare for a serious battle. What makes Whiscash so interesting is how quickly that illusion dissolves once trainers actually meet it in combat. It learns Surf, it learns Earthquake, it can even splash around with Ice Beam if you're generous. And yet, the numbers underneath that big round head are stubbornly mid-tier. Its attack is serviceable rather than scary. Its bulk is passable rather than unbreakable. And its speed leaves it waddling behind faster threats, too slow to feel dangerous and too weak to feel rewarding. Many players first meet Whiscash in a Hoenn gym, perhaps expecting this big catfish to be the centerpiece of a watery strategy. The arena is filled with water. The music is tense, and this strange creature surfaces with a rumble, as if the whole building might shake. Then the battle begins, and your grass-type move deletes it in one hit. Or your neutral attack takes off far more than you expected, and you realize that this supposed mud-dwelling menace is, in truth, just another gently frustrating speed bump. Its Pokédex entries talk about sensing earthquakes, about predicting tremors before they strike, and about ruling over the bottom of muddy waters like some ancient river spirit. It is described as territorial, as if other Pokémon dare not approach its domain, as if it might unleash unstoppable waves of power at any moment. And then, you look at its actual performance in battle, its modest stats and predictable move pool, and it becomes clear that this is not a story of glory or victory, but of a creature whose legend outgrew its numbers. Out past that muddy lake bed, Hoenn's water opens up into long, quiet routes, and as you surf further from shore, another pattern starts to appear. For every terrifying Gyarados, or elegant melodic, there are creatures that sit somewhere in the middle, not helpless, not impressive, just drifting along in a kind of permanent good enough. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine them drifting in the current. Now, because this is not a story of glory or victory, but of Hoenn's mid-tier misfits. Placed together, these three are easy to overlook. Pelipper, Whiscash, and Wailmer, a little flock and pair of waterlogged almosts. Pelipper is the rain setter that used to be just an HM bird. Whiscash is the catfish that should be scary but isn't. And Wailmer is the big balloon that doesn't hit very hard. A round blue promise that somehow never cashes out. None of them are truly weak, and yet none of them ever quite become the star of the team, or the story you tell later. Pelipper might be the funniest example of this quiet underachievement. In the original Hoenn adventures, most trainers caught one because they needed a flying water type to carry surf, fly, and a handful of other utility moves, turning this seabird into a glorified toolbox with wings. What makes Pelipper so interesting is that, in later generations, it suddenly gained a respectable role as a drizzle setter, summoning rain for stronger partners. And still, even then, it rarely felt like the main attraction, more like the weather report before the real battle began. Whiscash, lounging in its muddy ponds, looks like it should be terrifying. A water and ground type catfish, it shrugs off electric attacks, learns earthquake, and even stars in a small in-game event, where it causes a minor stir by supposedly predicting earthquakes. And yet, when trainers actually use it, the numbers are just a little too low, the damage just a little too soft, turning what should be a powerhouse into a mildly frustrating middle-of-the-road pick that is quickly replaced by something bulkier or stronger or simply more memorable. And then there is Wailmer, the cheerful sphere that evolves into one of the tallest Pokémon in existence and still somehow feels like a beach ball. Its HP pool is impressive, its body huge, its splash on the overworld iconic, but in battle, its attacks rarely match its size, leaving it to sponge hits and roll around while sharper water types do the real work. Imagine expecting a living whale and getting a bouncy castle instead. It's funny, it's charming, and it's not what you bring to a serious fight. The shared experience with all three is the same. You encounter them with a flicker of excitement, maybe even build a team around them for a while, and then, slowly, you realize there are simply better options waiting in Hoenn's deep roots and underwater caverns. They are too strong to be jokes, too weak to be reliable aces, occupying that strange middle ground where they accompany you for a few towns and then slip back into the PC box, half forgotten. And as Hoenn's waters stretch onward, another kind of disappointment waits. Not in the mid-tier, but in the fully evolved shapes that still manage to feel like filler. Those fully evolved disappointments fade into the distance, and the camera in your mind can pull back now, away from stats and move pools, out over Hoenn's map, until it settles on a tiny scrap of land ringed by dark water. Duford at night feels less like a town, and more like a lantern left floating in the ocean, a quiet pause between stronger currents, a place where this is not a story of glory or victory, but of resting weak creatures and tired trainers. The wooden docks creak softly as the tide breathes in and out, and you can almost place your feet there, feeling the worn planks under your shoes, while the sea presses gently against the pilings below. The winggull that spent the day shrieking over fishermen have gone hoarse and distant, their cries now thin and half-hearted as they settle into the rafters and rocky ledges, leaving more space for the soft slosh of water, the occasional hollow knock of a loose rope against a post, the small sounds that only appear when a town finally lets itself sleep. Out past the harbor lights, the sea becomes a dark, endless sheet, stretching in all directions until it blends into the sky, broken only by the faint pricks of passing ships, sliding slowly along Route 106 and 107. Somewhere out there, a waylord the size of a building might be surfacing with a sigh, and yet its enormous bulk still feels oddly light and hollow, like a balloon drifting over an aquarium of much smaller, much weaker things. For every mighty Kyogre, there is a Luvdisk. For every sharp-toothed Sharpedo, there is a timid little Phoebus hugging the rocks. Beneath that black surface, where the game's screen would simply show ripples, imagine them drifting in the current. Low-level Tentacool with no real plan. Magikarp and their Hoenn cousins bumping into each other in slow motion. Tiny schools of underpowered fish circling lazily through the seaweed forests that only appear when you dive. They are too weak to threaten anyone, too unimportant to remember by name. Placed together, these forgotten water types become the true background music of Hoenn's roots, a living, mildly frustrating lullaby. If you lie back on the dock in your mind, the world narrows to the boards beneath you, the salt in the air, and the rhythm of waves tapping gently at the shore, and you can settle in, close your eyes, letting the memory of endless surfing and slow, repetitive encounters blur into something almost soothing. No urgent quest markers, no rival to chase, no gym battle waiting around the corner, just the knowledge that below you, countless weak Pokemon are drifting quietly, doing nothing in particular, existing without pressure or purpose. What makes Hoenn's Sea at night so interesting is how it turns even the most disappointing water types into part of a larger calming pattern. Each helpless splash and failed attack, just another small pulse in the ocean's heartbeat. And as the sky over Duford deepens from navy to near black, we can push off from the dock one more time, letting our thoughts float slowly across these routes, taking a last unhurried tour through Hoenn's weakest water types, gathering their small stories like shells before the tide carries us gently toward the end. So as that last slow tour of the sea routes fades and the docks of Duford grow small behind you, another pattern begins to appear in the water, a softer constellation made not of stars, but of the weakest little shapes Hoenn can offer. Settle in, close your eyes, and let the rod dip once more. Because now we're not just meeting individual disappointments. We're gathering the true bottom tier, the creatures that define Hoenn's ocean as gentle, harmless, almost sleepy. Placed together, these four form a kind of quiet council of failure. Luvdisk, Phoebus, Magikarp, and Azurill, bobbing at the very surface of usefulness. Luvdisk is the heart that can't fight, a pink silhouette designed for romance and heart scales. Rather than any meaningful battle, fluttering in with weak stats and fluttering out again before it can do more than splash you with a timid water gun. Phoebus is the ugly fish waiting for beauty. Its ragged body and miserable move pool, asking trainers for patience it hasn't really earned yet. Magikarp is the flopping joke, the orange punchline that turns every encounter into a small, helpless performance of splash and nothing more. And Azurill, technically normal and fairy at first, is the baby barely ready for water. A round, worried balloon that seems like it might sink if you look at it too sternly. What makes this little cluster so interesting is how much they change the emotional texture of Hoenn's roots. For every sharp-toothed Sharpedo or looming Wailord, there is a Luvdisk that politely fails to threaten you, a Magikarp that only wastes your time, an Azurill that seems to apologize with its eyes, and a Phoebus that simply survives, drab and unnoticed, in a corner of Route 119's current. Imagine them drifting in the current as you surf from Slateport toward Pacifidlog, encounter after encounter, dissolving into the same weak splash, the same quick escape, battles becoming less like challenges and more like soft background noise. And yet, that helplessness has its own strange comfort. Knowing that most of what you hook or bump into out here can't really hurt your team lets your mind wander. You press A almost on instinct, and the ocean becomes a moving lullaby rather than a gauntlet. This is not a story of glory or victory, but of padding and filler, of the forgotten, the frustrating, and the failures of the water-type world, quietly doing an important job, keeping the sea roots low pressure, safe, even a little dull in the most soothing way. They still have value, these weak Pokémon, not as weapons of power, but as ambient companions on long, sleepy journeys, tiny actors in Hoenn's slow theater of waves and wind. And somewhere beneath them, in darker water and stranger shapes, other disappointments are waiting, less harmless, a little sharper, ready to remind you that the ocean's weakness has limits, and that the next splash you hear might not be so gentle. But for now, settle in, close your eyes, and let that sharper splash fade into the background, because tonight, the ocean around Hoenn is choosing its gentlest mask. The predators are somewhere else. The bosses are off-screen, and the water you're about to slip into is calm, dark, and almost weightless, stretched out beneath a wide Hoenn sky, where the moon hangs low over Slateport's distant glow. Imagine stepping off a quiet wooden pier, the kind you might find behind a forgotten house on Route 105, and easing yourself down the ladder until the water folds around you, cool but not cold, a soft pressure against your skin. Above, there's only the moon and a few scattered lights from tiny fishing boats. Below, there is depth, but it doesn't feel threatening, just slow and patient, like the game's underwater music turned down to a whisper. At first it seems empty, just you and the slow rise and fall of the waves. And then, as your breathing finds that rhythm, in and out, small shapes begin to move at the edge of your awareness, not lunging or circling, just existing. A Luvdisk drifts past, almost embarrassingly heart-shaped, tilting from side to side like a pink leaf that never quite learned how to be a proper fish. Its weak little fins flicking with no real intention of getting anywhere important tonight. Farther down, near a cluster of rocks that might hide an item in the games, but hide nothing more than silence here. A Phoebus hovers awkwardly, patchy scales catching the moonlight in dull flashes. What makes Phoebus so interesting is how much effort trainers once spent just to find something so helpless and unremarkable. And yet, in this quiet water, that plainness becomes soothing, like background noise in fish form. It doesn't want a battle. It barely seems to want to move. Every so often, there's a soft splash at the surface as a Magikarp breaks the water, more by accident than design, as if it misjudged where the ocean ends and the air begins. For every sleek melodic or terrifying Gyarados, there is this orange creature bouncing between waves with all the grace of a dropped potato, offering only comedy where other Pokemon offer power. And still, imagine them drifting in the current, the pink, the ragged, and the orange. Placed together, these weakest of swimmers forming a kind of clumsy constellation around you. There is no danger here. No sharp teeth, no timers, no HP bars politely asking you to choose a move. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of things that can barely splash, quietly sharing the same water as you. As you float, you can let your breathing match that slow, pixelated surf animation from Hoenn's roots, in and out, in and out, until your body feels as light as a heart scale drifting down from a love disc that no one bothered to catch. If a thought about battles or teams or frustrating encounters with these weak Pokemon tries to surface, you can let it pass the way a Magikarp does, briefly, noisily, and then gone, sinking back into stillness. Down below, Phoebus keeps its lonely vigil by the rocks. To one side, a small school of Luwdisk rearranges itself into nothing in particular. Somewhere behind you, another faint splash marks a Magikarp's latest failed attempt at ambition. And yet, in this imagined space, they are enough. No expectations, no pressure to evolve, no trainers demanding more than they can give, only the soft company of Hoenn's weakest water types, keeping watch as you drift. Soon, the moonlight will blur, the distant towns will dim, and even these small shapes will fade into the dark, making room for stranger, slightly stronger creatures, waiting deeper in Hoenn's sea. But for now, you can stay here a little longer, floating in the quiet with the weakest, until sleep pulls you gently below the surface. And as you float there, held by Hoenn's warm water like a blanket, the mind can drift from strength and stats to something softer, to the quiet little faces that share the sea with you. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's about the weak, the overlooked, the ones that almost never decide a battle, but still manage to linger in memory when the screen finally fades to black. For every mighty Kyogre churning the ocean, there is a Lotad, half asleep and half submerged, just trying not to tip over. What makes Lotad so interesting is how completely uninterested it seems in impressing anyone. A tiny creature with a lily pad hat, eyes that look permanently drowsy, and stubby legs that suggest it would rather be carried by the current than walk anywhere on its own. In battle, it is slow, fragile, and often helpless. A little disc of damp disappointment. And yet, that same sleepy expression makes it feel like the perfect partner for a late-night stroll around a Hoenn pond. More pillow than powerhouse. Then there is Wailmer, the round balloon of the sea, all grin and no plan. Wailmer's Pokedex entries talk about it joyfully spouting water and playing at the surface, but they rarely mention it winning anything important. It is a bouncing beach ball of a Pokemon, huge in body and surprisingly weak in real combat roles. Trainers quickly learn that its constant smile does not translate into reliable power. Still, when you imagine them drifting in the current just offshore from Slateport, gently bobbing like living buoys, it is hard not to feel a little calmer, as if their simple, repetitive motions are a lullaby disguised as a creature. Corsola, too, sits quietly in Hoenn's waters, a gentle coral form that looks more like scenery than a fighter. Its branches are small, its body is delicate, and in a serious battle, it tends to crack under pressure. More decorative reef than defensive wall. Placed together, these three almost form a tiny diorama. The drowsy pad, the floating ball, the pastel coral, each adding a different shade of softness to the roots around Duford and the shallows of Passifidlog, turning the map into something that feels lived in, rather than just designed for victory. If you settle in, close your eyes, and think about them outside the harsh light of a gym challenge, they change. Pokédex lines about Lotad ferrying small Pokémon, Wailmer playing endlessly with waves, Corsola forming quiet homes for sea life, short animations of them bobbing, blinking, and doing almost nothing of strategic value. Even your own imagination filling in the gaps as you picture them resting under the dive spots, where the music softens and the world feels far away. In that space, a weak water type becomes less a tool and more a presence. In a sleep-oriented world like this, personality and visual softness matter more than any damage calculation. A roaring legendary is impressive, but it is not exactly soothing. A helpless little Lotad, a smiling Wailmer, or a fragile Corsola makes a far better bedside companion than a storm-summoning monster pacing in your thoughts. So as you drift further from the shore of competition, you might quietly choose one weak Hoenn water type you secretly like. Not for its strength, but for the tiny, comforting details that make it feel alive. The tilt of its eyes, the wobble of its body, the way it seems built not for conquest, but for company. As we sink now towards stranger shapes waiting in the deeper dark. So, as we sink toward those stranger shapes, the question quietly changes from which weak Hoenn water type you like, to where in Hoenn you would actually let yourself fall asleep beside them. Not in a tense battle, not in the middle of some desperate sweep for power, but in a place where this is not a story of glory or victory, just a soft backdrop of water and harmless, helpless creatures going about their tiny lives. Settle in, close your eyes, and let Hoenn spread out in your mind. For every harsh, jagged victory road, there is a gentler shoreline, a floating town, or a silent trench waiting below. Maybe you find yourself on the quiet beach just outside Slateport, long after the last trainers have packed up their tents and pokeballs, when the sand has cooled and the only sound left is the slow, repetitive hush of waves folding themselves onto the shore again and again until time starts to blur. Here the air is warm and a little salty, the sky washed in that pale violet that comes just after sunset, and Wingull and Pelipper bicker weakly over scraps before giving up and perching in a lazy, uneven line along a signpost. They are not elegant hunters tonight, just slightly awkward silhouettes with beaks too big for their own good, occasionally flapping down to poke at a shell and then thinking better of it. Imagine them drifting in the current of the sky, if the wind can be called a kind of water, their cries distant enough to be more lullaby than alarm. And yet, maybe you don't want the surface at all. Maybe you choose to fall asleep deep underwater on one of Hoenn's dive routes, where the music softens, the colors dim, and even the game itself seems to whisper instead of speak. Down here, Relicanth hovers like an old stone someone forgot to put down, and Clamperl clutches its shell shut, as if guarding a secret no trainer has ever really needed in a serious battle. That dark patch of sea is a reminder of how Hoenn is built. Not as a straight line of battles, but as a wide, breathing map, where water is always just a few steps away. waiting to pull you off course in the gentlest possible way. For every towering volcano or dense forest, there is another shimmering route, another dive spot, another quiet inlet where weak little creatures circle endlessly beneath the surface. Hoenn's designers covered more than a third of the region in water, and what makes that so interesting is how rarely that ocean feels dangerous. When trainers surf out from Slateport toward Pacific Log, they are not met with endless Sharpedo ambushes or relentless storms of power. Instead, they meet tentacool that sting a little, wingull that flap in, squawk, and flee, and magacarp that do absolutely nothing, offering only the most half-hearted attempt at a battle. The sea is busy, but it is not threatening. It is cluttered with weakness. Placed together, these small encounters turn the ocean into something like background music, rather than a boss rush. Tentacool appears so often that it stops being a real opponent and becomes a kind of moving wallpaper, a jellyfish-shaped loading screen between destinations. Wingull, with its awkward proportions and flimsy wings, glides in as if to say hello, pecks once or twice, and then faints to almost anything. Luvedisc floats by in heart-shaped silence, more valuable for the heart scale it might be hiding than for any move it can actually use in battle. A helpless little token of affection that can barely defend itself. Over time, those repetitive, low-stakes encounters start to sink into memory in a very particular way. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of surfing for 10-15 minutes at a time, tapping the same button, watching bubbles rise and fade, while the same weak Pokemon appear again and again until they blur into a kind of soft, blue haze. Settle in, close your eyes, and you can probably still hear Hoenn's ocean theme, still see the slow scroll of Route 134's currents, still feel that mixture of mild frustration and gentle comfort as yet another level 13 tentacool pops up. And yet, that is exactly how the region's identity settles into place. Hoenn is remembered for Kyogre and the Flood, for ancient titans and dramatic skies, but just as much, it is remembered for the countless tiny things that never evolve into legends at all. For every primal force reshaping the map, there is a Wingull stealing chips on a pier, a Luvedisc hiding in coral, a Magikarp splashing uselessly beside your raft. Imagine them drifting in the current, filling the space between story beats so the world never feels empty, only gently occupied. In a sleep-oriented journey, those weak water types become the ideal companions. They do not demand strategy. They do not threaten a wipe. They barely even insist on being noticed. They simply appear, bob, flicker, and fade, like thoughts you have just before drifting off. As we move on to the next waters and the next set of disappointing creatures, Hoenn's ocean lingers behind us, not as a gauntlet we conquered, but as a soft, inhabited silence we floated through together. Hoenn's water lingers like that, a soft memory more than a challenge. And as you think back on it, something else starts to surface. Those weak little creatures that once felt like obstacles begin to blur at the edges, turning from sharp, frustrating moments into part of the region's gentle background noise. Like the hum of a fan you only notice when it stops. For every dramatic champion battle, there is a long surf across Route 134 where nothing truly dangerous happens. Only Wingull circling lazily overhead and Tentacool bobbing at the surface, asking politely to waste one more turn of your time. What makes Hoenn's weakest water-type Pokemon so interesting is how completely they fail to threaten you. They nibble at your patience, not your HP, and in doing so, They quietly define the ocean as a safe, predictable space. A place where trainers can relax their shoulders between real fights. Back then, it felt different. Another tentacle poisoning your starter. Another wingall with the same pecking animation. Another love disc appearing when you were secretly hoping for something rare. And it all stacked into this low-level irritation, a background grumble in the middle of your journey. And yet, remembered from a distance, those same encounters soften. The edges sanded down by time until all that remains is the rhythm. Encounter, splash, faint, move on, like waves repeating the same weak pattern along a quiet shore. Imagine them drifting in the current, not as enemies, but as extras in a very slow film. A Louvre disc that never wins a battle, existing mostly to hand over heart scales, like a slightly confused shopkeeper who lives underwater. A wingall that insists on using water gun, even when it barely scratches you. Valiantly ineffective. A line of tentacle beneath the surf, pulsing in place, more like living scenery than opponents. Placed together, these creatures turn Hoenn's sea roots into something closer to a lullaby than a test. If you settle in, close your eyes, and just listen to a long, calm video about them, that old annoyance can melt into something surprisingly tender. The repetitive cry of wingall, the gentle splash text, the soft dive music as you slip under the surface on Route 124 or 126. All of it becomes a kind of bedtime story about weak, helpless Pokemon doing their best to be noticed and mostly failing. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of comfortable failure, of design quirks and underpowered moves being reimagined as ambience. There is a quiet invitation here to let go of sorting everything into good or bad, usable or boxed forever. For every Gyarados that dominates a battle, there is a nameless tentacle that never stood a chance, and both have their place in the water. As we drift onward, try allowing Hoenn's weakest water types to simply be what they are: small, gentle, and quietly present, waiting in the next patch of sea for you to close your eyes and float past them once more. So now, settle in, close your eyes, and let that thought of small, gentle, and quietly present stretch out into something you can almost feel beneath you. The map of Hoenn fades away, the menus and stats and move lists dissolve, and what's left is a soft, dark sheet of water somewhere between Slateport's harbor lights and the drifting wooden platforms of Pacifid Log Town. You're lying on a little boat, barely more than a raft, its boards warm from the day and now cooling in the night air, rocking with that slow, predictable rhythm that Hoenn's roots seem to have when no trainers are surfing past. Above, the sky is wide and clean, a scatter of stars that look like they could be item drops. If only you could press A on the horizon, and yet they just watch in silence, offering no battles, no experience, just a quiet backdrop. Wingall silhouettes pass overhead, faint and fluttering, their cries softened into distant, sleepy sounds instead of the usual irritating screech that greets trainers every few steps along the shore. One glides low, considers landing, then thinks better of it, because even this weak little creature can tell that nothing important is happening here tonight. This is not a story of glory or victory. This is the part of the journey where even the wild encounters seem to agree that you deserve a break. Somewhere off to the side, there's the occasional splash of a Magikarp, the familiar, almost comedic arc of orange that never quite leads to anything. Just another helpless leap and a return to the sea. A Wailmer surfaces farther out, huge but oddly weightless, like a beach ball someone forgot to deflate, exhaling a puff of mist that vanishes into the dark. For every terrifying sharpedo that patrols Hoenn's waters, there is this dozing whalemer, this flopping magacarp, these winggull, too distracted to aim a single water gun. Around you, the ocean is populated entirely by the weak and the peaceful. No Gyarados, no Melodic, no champion's ace waiting to punish a misstep. Just Luvedisc somewhere below, tracing lazy heart-shaped paths in the current. More interested in heart scales than in damage, and maybe a Lotad or two bobbing like forgotten coasters on a pond. Imagine them drifting in the current, not as threats, but as background decorations that Hoenn placed here so the sea wouldn't feel empty. Your breath can match the motion of the boat now, in as it rises, out as it settles, slow and deep, the way a waylord might breathe if it ever bothered to take anything seriously. Thoughts come and go like weak encounters. They appear, they splash once, they fail to impress, and then they sink back down, leaving only ripples. If sleep wants to find you here, you can let it. These low-level water types will keep swimming in place, in holding your spot in the ocean, patiently waiting for you to return. And when you do drift back, when the stars sharpen and the boat's boards feel solid again, there is still more sea to cross, and still stranger, softer failures waiting just beyond the next route sign. Closer to the surface, the last of the weak water types make their brief curtain call. A Lodad drifts past, its lily pad back tilted at an angle, looking more like forgotten pool furniture than a fearsome creature. And yet, it paddles on without complaint. A couple of winggull shuffle along a spray-wet rock, folding themselves down for the night, too flimsy and too fragile to impress in a serious battle, but perfectly suited to being moving punctuation marks in Hoenn's sky. Somewhere below, a pair of Luvedisc flash pale pink, then vanish into the darker blue, like shy thoughts that refuse to become anything more than background affection. If you settle in, close your eyes. You can almost imagine them drifting in the current beneath you, not as threats, not as tools of power, but as small, helpless decorations in a sea that does not need them to be anything else. This is not a story of glory or victory. For every champion's Gyarados, there is a bewildered Luvedisc. For every perfectly trained Melodic, there is a Lotad still trying to remember more than one useful move. Placed together, these weak little shapes form a quiet mosaic. The forgotten, the frustrating, and the faintly amusing. And yet, even as the camera in your mind keeps pulling back, Hoenn does not pause for your departure. Those water-type Pokemon will keep circling the pier posts, sleeping in seaweed forests, and bobbing at the surface when the in-game sun rises again, unchanged by whether anyone is watching, unaffected by whether any trainers ever decide to use them. They will still be failing to impress, still being gently mocked by their own Pokédex entries, still existing. Let your thoughts follow that coastline as it shrinks. The lights of Slateport, Dewford, and Pacifidlog growing smaller, softer, and finally blurring into one dim band along the horizon, until even that fades into comfortable darkness. When you need it again, you can return to Hoenn's waters, to these weak water-type Pokemon and their quiet, unremarkable lives, and let them drift beside you once more. For now, it is enough to float, to let go, and to rest in the dark, slow sea where nothing is required of you at all.